Alright, today's video is going to be covering group policy objects and the group policy editor specifically in Windows 7. So last video we quickly showed a drive map using a group policy object, which is used to affect users and computers across the domain, but you can also use the group policy editor on your local machine. Now this group policy editor is only available in Windows 7 on the Pro and Ultimate versions. So we have our Ultimate version installed, which means when we type in gpedit.msc, then we get it brought up. So I'm going to hit enter. And of course you can always use the run box, remember, to type in gpedit.msc. And now we have our local group policy editor. Now the first thing I want to point out is that some people also use the secpol.msc, the securitypolicy.msc, to open a similar window, which, as you can see here, has some security settings. But if we go to our computer configuration and we go to our Windows settings, we have our security settings right here, which is the exact same thing as the secpol.msc. But this group policy editor, the gpedit.msc, is a much more broad version, which is why we're going to be sticking to this. So the first thing I'm going to cover is some of the basic features with the group policy editor. So we go to local group policy, computer configuration, Windows settings, security settings. Now the first one we're going to look at is account policy settings and then password policy. Right now we're enforcing a password history of 0 passwords remembered. Let's say make that 10. Maximum password age should be, let's say, 60 days, so about 2 months. And the minimum password age should be 1 day. Minimum password length, I'm going to say, is 8 characters. Password must meet complexity requirements enabled. And store passwords using reversible encryption is disabled. So I'd say this is a fairly good benchmark to follow right here. The user cannot use the same password. If the user enters a password of password, then the next time they have to change their password, they can't use that password, and they can't reuse that same password until 10 passwords later. And to prevent the user from just changing their password 10 times in 1 day, we have this in place. The user can only change their password once a day. So if they want to, 10 days later, they could have the same password again, but then they'd be having to wait 60 days, and after 60 days, then they have to reset their password again anyways. So the minimum password length is 8 characters, and the password must meet complexity requirements. So the explanation of this is that essentially the user's password has to have 3 different types of characters, so either an uppercase, a lowercase, a number, or a non-alphabetical character. So it has to have 3 of these 4 different options. Now we'll look at the account policy settings, and if you select this one, it's all grayed out. You can't do anything. What you actually have to do with this one is select the middle option. So if somebody invalidly logs onto your account 5 times in a row, let's say, so if they enter the password 5 times incorrectly, then they'll be locked out for 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, that counter will reset. So let's say OK, and keep that at 30 minutes. But if you're in a situation where you were scared that you might lock yourself out and you're under a time constraint, then you might want to say maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes, or 15 minutes, but I don't think I'll be guessing the wrong password anytime soon, so let's just say 30 minutes for now. Now, local policy options. Here we have our audit policy. And before I sort of explain what auditing is, I just want to say a lot of people do this a slow way when there's a lot faster way to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one finger on the letter S, one on F, and then I'll have my other hand over on enter and backspace. So I hit enter, SF enter, and then enter, SF enter, and I'm not using backspace actually, pardon me, I'm using the down arrow. So you can go through all these, selecting all of them because that's the most secure thing to do. So now let's talk about what auditing actually is. If someone tries to log onto your computer, whether they successfully do it or whether they fail to do it, then all that information is audited. If they do anything in the account management, whether it's successful or not successful, then it's audited. All of these things, whether it's successful or not successful, gets audited. And what that means is that in our Windows event viewer, there are logs created. So if we actually wanted to, we could come to our Windows logs, our security logs, our application logs, and look for these different audited events. So for best security, we're just going to say have them all at success failure, and to save yourself time, we're using enter, SF, enter, and then hit the down arrow. Enter, SF, enter, hit the down arrow. So now we're going to look at user rights assignment and security options. Oops, the snap and stopped working. Okay, so user rights assignments, there's a lot of stuff here. So what you're going to want to do is, if you're configuring all of this, you're going to want to follow some sort of benchmark, such as the Center for Internet Security benchmark, and they have a lot of different benchmarks for tons of different operating systems. And we also have the security options. I'll quickly cover both of these as best as I can though. So let's start on the user rights assignment. I'll cover a few of the basic ones. Access this computer from the network. Well, if we want this computer to be accessed from the network, I guarantee that everyone shouldn't be in there. We're probably only going to be looking for administrators and maybe some authenticated users, but we'll definitely remove everyone because we don't want, say for instance, the guest coming in here. But you have to follow sort of according to your scenario and what's best for you at the time. That's what you want to be following. So allow logon locally. I do not want the guest logging in, so I'm going to remove him. Allow logon through remote desktop services. Administrators and remote desktop users seem suitable. Change the system time. Our local service and our administrators is good for that. Let's come down here to deny access to this computer from the network. We're going to set to guest, which is already good. And deny logon locally, we should also set to guest. And also, actually, we could add user or group, and we could go object types, and we could select groups, and that way we could say anybody who's in the guests group also gets denied logon. So we could do the same thing for deny logon through remote desktop services. We'll say guests, check our object types, make sure it's groups, check names, and we'll do space, check for the guest. Okay. For shutdown from a remote system, well, I don't want anybody shutting down my computer, so I'm just going to go ahead and say that nobody should be shutting down my computer remotely. Only I'm allowed to do that from the local computer. Next, we have shut down the system. So we have administrators, users, backup operators. This is fine because we have some user logging in here, then that's perfectly fine if they want to shut down the system. But say for instance this was a server, you don't want users shutting it down. Only administrators should be able to shut down the system on a server. So that's sort of a basic few ones for the user rights assignment. I think I'll also go through these security options here. So right here, we can change the account status of our administrator. So I showed you in the very first introduction video, you can right click and disable. But through here you can also do it. So our guest account is disabled, which is good. And right here, accounts, limit local account use of blank passwords to console logon only. Now this is a very interesting one, but to explain it, you might want to go right click properties and check the explanation. So this security setting determines whether local accounts that are not password protected can be used to log in from locations other than the computer console. If enabled, local accounts that are not password protected will only be able to log on at the computer's keyboard. So for instance, right now, my user account that I'm logged in with, user McBeans, he has no password. If remote desktop services was enabled onto this computer and I wanted to remotely log onto this computer, I wouldn't be able to log on with user McBeans because he's only allowed to log on at the actual console while he's physically sitting down in front of it. So accounts, rename administrator account. What people often like to do is, because if someone is going to be getting into or guessing your password, trying to get into your computer, it's a pretty safe bet that your user account might be named administrator or admin. So what people like to do lots of the time is rename this. So they could call it whatever the heck they want. You could rename it here if you wanted to. I'm just gonna leave this for now. But you could do the same thing with the guest account. So the guest account is disabled, but if somebody was trying to guess the password, then they would actually have to, try to guess something other than the guest username. So they'd be guessing not only the password, but the username, if you understand what I'm saying. Now, shut down system automatically if unable to log security audits. This one sometimes is disabled, but it's not a good thing to have disabled because you don't want your system randomly shutting down. So you should always have this one disabled. Devices, allowed to format and eject removable media. You might only want administrators to be able to mess around with any removable media that's plugged into your computer, especially once again if it's a server. But for right now, I'm going to say it does not matter. Now, devices, prevent users from installing printer drivers. I'm going to say enabled, because you don't just want anybody installing some random printer driver on your machine. And this one right here, restrict CD-ROM access to locally logged on users only. I don't want anybody who's remotely logged on to be accessing what I have in my CD drive. And likewise for the floppy drive, even though nobody uses floppy drives anymore, and I definitely don't have one on my PC. So now we're going to scroll down here to the interactive logon section. So it says display user information if the session is locked. So if I were to go right now and say lock, then it says exactly my user information right here. User McBeans is locked. But if I were to enable that option, or rather do not display the user information, and lock myself, then I have no idea that that user is locked. So I can log in with my user account and get in that way. So if you're trying to control any sort of mistakes of somebody seeing information, then that would be the way to do it. But for right now, I'm going to say just display the username. It's convenient for using a workstation because there's never going to be a time where I don't trust somebody to sit down in front of this virtual machine here and see what user account is logged in. Interactive logon, do not display username. I'm going to say enabled. So if you sit down in front of my computer, you have to know the username that you're going to be using to get in. It doesn't give you the list of all the users. You have to actually know what your username is and know what your password is to get in. And this one I feel like is sort of the double negative going on. So it's do not require Control-Alt-Delete, which we'll say is disabled, is the good thing. So if you sit down at the front of the computer, you have to hit Control-Alt-Delete to be able to log in first. And if it was enabled, then you wouldn't have to press Control-Alt-Delete. And I'll say the message title for users logging on is warning, and the message text is unauthorized access is prohibited. So lots of the time people recommend, putting something according to company policy here, but we're just gonna kind of put something fairly generic in case you are working in sort of a business scenario. Then you'd always want to ask you'd always want to ask the owner of the company what you'd want the information to say. But now we are going to look for let's go to network access. So we're going to take a look at the properties of the let everyone permissions apply to anonymous users. So this one's explained. Windows allows anonymous users to perform certain activities, such as enumerating the name of domain accounts and network shares. This is convenient, for example, when an administrator wants to grant access to a user in a trusted domain that does not maintain reciprocal trust. By default, the everyone security identifier, SID, the SID, is removed from the token created for anonymous connections. Therefore, user permissions granted to the everyone group do not apply to anonymous users. If this option is set, anonymous users can only access those resources for which the anonymous user has been explicitly given permission. So essentially, what I'm going to say is always leave this one disabled. If you don't necessarily understand everything there, then it's not that big of a deal right now. I'm just going to say do not leave that enabled. That's my recommendation. And the next one that we'll look at is, let's look at the user account control at the very bottom. So Admin approval mode for the built-in user or for the built-in administrator account, we are going to say is disabled. So essentially the options are enabled. The built-in administrator account uses the admin approval mode. By default, any operation that requires elevation will prompt the user for operation. And disabled is the built-in administrator account runs all applications with full administrative privileges. So disabled is default, but I'm going to say it is enabled because you want the user to authenticate. Allow UI access applications to prompt for elevation without using the secure desktop. No, you always want people to be using the secure desktop, so that's going to be disabled. So the secure desktop can be disabled only by the user of the interactive desktop or by disabling the user access control. Switch to the secure desktop when prompting for elevation. So leave that one disabled. Behavior of the elevation prompt for administrators in admin approval mode. You can select your different options here. This one's prompt for consent for non-Windows binaries. I'm going to say prompt for credentials on the secure desktop. So they'll have to enter their credentials to make sure what they're doing is approved by the administrator. So once again, the idea here is that even if the administrator account was left open, you're not just sitting down in front of it, or somebody can't just sit down in front of it and be able to make changes. Behavior of the elevation prompt for standard users. It's always going to be prompt for credentials on the secure desktop because you don't want a standard user to be able to do something. Or what you could even do is automatically deny. If you're going to be doing something, you're going to be using an administrator account. So why would you be using a normal user account anyway? I'm actually going to change my mind and I'm going to say automatically deny elevation requests. And this is especially true on servers, by the way. Detect application installations and prompt for elevation. Definitely true. Only elevate executables that are signed and validated. Yes. So let's look at the explanation. Enforces PKI certification path validation for a given executable file before it is permitted. So if the file isn't trusted by your operating system, then it'll just be straight out denied. Only elevate UI access applications that are installed in secure locations. Enabled. Run all administrators in admin approval mode. So this policy must be enforced and related to the UAC policy settings, and must also be appropriately built in to allow the administrator account and all the users of the administrators group to run in admin approval mode. So we're going to leave that at default. Switch to the secure desktop and prompting for elevation, enabled. And virtualize file and registry write failures to per user locations, enabled. So there's a lot of information here, and if you're just sort of looking at this randomly and don't have any clue what you're looking for, once again, I highly recommend using the Center for Internet Security benchmarks. You can find them per operating system to be able to see exactly what settings all of these should be, because when it comes down to it, each one of these could help make your system a little bit more secure, and in every particular situation, that one random one up here or over here could be the one that ends up really helping you out. And as well as learning the group policy to sort of see the other areas, such as the fact that you can access your Windows firewall through the group policy editor, and just seeing different things like that, your administrative templates and your user configurations. These are all things that you'll probably come to get to learn or at least be exposed to. But for right now, I just wanted to show you the security settings, the account policy, password policy, account lockout, and audit, user rights, and security options. These ones are the big ones for right now. So if you sort of go through these, read some of the descriptions, and just kind of, trust yourself in the fact that if something sounds bad, then you think, okay, then it sounds like this should be disabled, then stick with that and disable it. But the idea here is just trying to do your best to learn all the different options and at least get exposed to them.